Welcome to the Scott and Holland podcast, back for the second time here in season 9 tonight. Folks, there's really nothing like a Cougar season preview to make it feel real after months and months of waiting that we are truly on the doorstep of a big, and I think undeniably historic football season. And we are now 2 for 2 in this young season of podcasting with coming back here to pretty huge college realignment news that directly affects the Big 12. So, we're going to have plenty to talk about that tonight. Dustin, my friend and one of my co-hosts, I assume that you have spent the majority of the last 72 hours Googling things to do on future roadies to Tempe, Tucson, Salt Lake City. But how are you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about that future Salt Lake City road trip. I've actually never been to Salt Lake City, I don't think, despite growing up in the western part of the United States. So always seemed like a fun town. But yeah, obviously, I think we're going to get into it. I think, like probably both of you, have some mixed feelings about the whole realignment saga. But happy to be here chatting with y'all in season 9 now. Just a couple weeks away from honest to goodness Cougar sports.
And still on an emotional high, I would assume, from one of our listeners saying that he's a great addition to the show. Bobby,
thank you.
How are you doing this Monday night?
I'm good, buddy. It's finally nice to be at my house for a couple of days, and really looking forward to that. So I leave again on Friday, so we're gonna take advantage of being home as much as we can.
No doubt. So before we get going, got to mention at the top here our good friends and new sponsors, Charlie Hustle on the World Wide Web at charliehustle.com. Many of you already have, but if you have not, let me assure you that Charlie Hustle are great folks. They released a collection of vintage Houston Cougar tees, crew necks, and hoodies that you absolutely need to get your hands on. Just by listening to the show, you're going to know our promo code. That is SHP15, SHP15. And using that promo code checkout is going to save you 15%. You're not just going to get a great, unique vintage Cougar design. You're going to get a comfortable, good-fitting tee. I'm a bigger guy, so not always a given that a shirt is going to fit me in a comfortable way. And I got to say, since I got my Charlie Hustle shirts a few weeks ago, I can promise you they're in the top 1% of most comfortable shirts I own. They're that good. Great Cougar designs as well. And like I said last week, just want to say we've been humbled by the support of listeners and followers of the show. Believe me, our friends at Charlie Hustle have noticed it too. And without giving anything away, watch the space long term. So charliehustle.com, promo code SHP15. Do all that stuff, fellas. Some episode we do this season, I presume, is not going to be leading with the Big 12 adding a new school or schools, but this is not going to be that week, is it?
No, it's really not. We had the wild day on Friday morning with the Big 12 officially adding Arizona State, and Utah. And it's funny because last episode we kind of talked about it like it was a bit of a fait accompli because it sure looked like the Pac-12 was in fact going to go down in flames. And then there was that brief moment where, if you were on social media on Friday morning, where all of a sudden it was like, oh, wait, hold on. Like all of a sudden all the reporters were like, whoa, hold on, back up, guys.
I just want to butt in, by the way. It was very funny because that happened at about 5:36 a.m. my time. So I was not up for it. So I just got to see after the fact, like, oh, wow. Looks like there was a last little hurrah for the Pac-12.
Yeah, I was at work trying to be productive because I've already had a couple of unproductive days just doing realignment, Twitter scrolling, and then was like, oh crap, or is the Pac-12 really going to stay together? Look like they're, George Kliavkoff is going to be the smuggest human being on earth after pulling a last second rabbit out of his hat and keeping the Pac-12 together. But and the rumor mill, the reason for it kind of was that, Oregon and Washington had gotten lowballed by the Big Ten and were considering staying in the Pac-12 and signing the Apple TV media deal and rolling the dice on the subscription model again. But it quickly became clear that I think in retrospect, it was nothing more than a ploy by the two Pacific Northwest schools to, get a slightly better deal from the Big Ten and get a little bit better of a distribution in the near future before they eventually graduate to the full media distribution, which they obviously got an offer that they were okay with because then I believe it was 10 minutes before the Pac-12 meeting was supposed to start, in which all of the Pac-12 presidents were going to okay, yeah, we're signing this thing. All of a sudden, Washington and Oregon were like, no, we're out. And once they were out, it was clear that there was no viable conference for the four corner schools to remain in. And so despite some what we saw for the last several weeks was obvious hesitance from the leadership, especially at Utah and Arizona State, but nonetheless the Big 12 is now set to add all four of Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah heading into the 2024-25 athletics season. And Brett Yormark has now, we can officially say, landed all four of the schools that he has been most interested in for the past year. So, we'll get into certainly what it means for the Big 12 as a conference. But guys, like I say, just what are some of your reactions to just seeing we talked about it last week as a possibility, but now we are here saying, yeah, it sure looks like, barring some weird miracle where some zombie version of the Pac-12 is cobbled back together. The Pac-12 conference looks like it's not going to exist a year from now.
Yeah, I saw it happening, but I didn't see it happening within like 24 hours. You mentioned last week's episode, we were jokingly like, this could all just be nonsense in 24 hours. And then 24 hours later, it was like, oh, that actually happened. So I didn't expect it to be this quick. I think my first reaction when I see everything and I think about everything as a whole is I'm really surprised Stanford doesn't have a home right now. Like it's very like Cal, big state school, you're a little surprised by it, but Stanford they're pretty good at a lot of Olympic sports, right? And I know Olympic sports don't move the needle. I was a big proponent of football guides, everything, but like Stanford's been decent at football. They have, private institution, they're very high academic standards. Like to me, if they felt like a Pac-12 school, like through and through. Like when you think of Pac-12 and what a Pac-12 school looks like, Stanford is one of the ones that you're just like, oh yeah. And to me, when everything was breaking up, Stanford really felt like, oh, they're going to fit in perfectly with the Big Ten, right? The Big Ten focuses heavy on their academics of conference members and things like that. It just felt like a fit for them to go over. And now to see Stanford out there with no home, that was probably the biggest surprise for me, besides how quickly the Pac-12 fell apart.
Yeah, I think we had all of Thursday for our last episode not getting out of date, at least in terms of the realignment. So, and frankly, I was grateful that we had Thursday, given how quickly everything moved. And I figured some of these moves would happen eventually. I didn't think we would be back less than a week later, basically talking about the Pac-12 in the past tense as a conference. And I'm not going to get too maudlin about the future of the four remaining Pac-12 schools, other than, I guess, saying as a Cougar fan, I can empathize about being a team kind of left behind by a big seismic move that you just didn't have to make the lifeboat for, like the Cougars did about 30 years ago when the Southwest Conference broke up. But I mean, you could do a whole series of podcasts about how the Pac-10/Pac-12 ended up losing 2/3 of its conference membership in just over a year. And in a scenario right now where the three of us are really struggling to imagine this conference existing after next year. I mean, obviously, former Commissioner Larry Scott, whose Pac-12 network really sunk the conference financially, should be blamed. But I think what often gets ignored is the people who empowered him. The Pac-12 presidents at that time should also get a lot of blame as well. But the current commissioner, George Kliavkoff, the current group of presidents, I don't think should get off scot-free. Apparently, this group had a chance 2 years ago when the Red River schools left the Big 12 to absorb the remaining Big 12 membership and chose not to, and turned their nose up at expansion, I think, a couple different other times in the decade prior to this. And a lot of the arrows are getting kind of slung at the TV networks and their greed in light of the Pac-12 collapse. And I don't think that's wrong. I think there should be, I think ire pointed to those people and what they've done to college football, but I don't think any accounting of this conference and how it collapsed should overlook just an unbelievable incompetence in leadership, past and present, from the Pac-12. I think on a happier note, I do think the three schools we're going to talk about that have entered the Big 12, I really do think that entrenches this as the third best conference, and that two of the three teams immediately and obviously make you a lot better at football or men's basketball. I think we know too. So it's good news for us if we're talking about this from a Cougar fan perspective. Good news for college sports at large. I think we all agree it's a signs point to know, even if we can be appreciative of the Cougs kind of getting a good run of luck here in the last year or so.
Yeah, it's kind of like we talked about. It certainly is nicer when realignment comes around to be on the side of like, we're in the conference that's going to be okay. We don't have to worry about if this conference is going to dissolve around us or if we're going to get a lifeboat out. But yeah, I mean, just in terms of the larger evolution of the sport, I mean, I think you have to, okay, this is realignment up to now. The one thing we know about realignment is it doesn't stop, and where does it go from here? And I think the next kind of like we talked about last week is the next logical domino is the ACC, and whenever that grant of rights either runs out or when eventually Florida State throws enough money at their lawyers that they're able to find a way to kind of duck out of that, at that point, what's stopping the Big Ten and the SEC from rating the biggest brands from that conference and then saying, hey, we don't need anybody else. We're going to do our own thing. We think of ourselves like one of the other professional leagues out there. Major League Baseball's got the American, the National League. The NBA has the Western, the Eastern Conference. NFL has AFC, NFC. Here's this new semi-pro, college sports league. We also have two leagues. They're called the Big Ten and the SEC. Like, what is stopping them from really breaking off and kind of doing their own thing at that point? And I think that there's certainly some things that they'll have to go through. And one of the things that I was listening to the our flagship podcast, the 1012 podcast, earlier today, and Philip was talking about one of the things that is maybe beneficial, that is maybe a long-term move by Brett Yormark is the basketball emphasis, and not only because he has a plan down the road to break off the football and the basketball TV rights, and he feels like you can get more money by selling them both as their own enticing entities, but also one of the sticking points if the Big Ten and the SEC choose to do that is March Madness. And if you completely flip the bird to the NCAA, you're losing out on March Madness. And if you try to put your own version of that on, what version of that is going to appeal to fans if you don't have brands like Kansas and Arizona and Houston and Baylor and like that? You can't put on an honest to goodness NCAA tournament like that. So I think buying and even though football is driving the train, certainly the March Madness is a huge moneymaker for the schools across the board. So, really curious to see what goes on next. I'm not the first person by any stretch to make this analogy, but when we saw the big teams in European football try to break off and make the Super League, we saw their fans stage a massive revolt to the point where they had to scrap the thing. And are American fans going to do that?
Absolutely not. No chance.
Based on the way that they've reacted to realignment this far, which is to basically broadly think first and foremost about their own school's self-interest, which is, including myself.
Present company included, yeah.
Yeah, right.
That tells me that that's probably not going to happen. Are American politicians going to step in and prevent it? Based on every interaction and intersection that college sports has had with American politics for the past half century, you can pretty reliably count on politicians to not do anything to prevent their rich university friends from making more money. So it's hard to see what the fail safe is that exists that's going to stop the Big Ten and SEC at some point from just breaking off and doing their own thing and kind of flipping everybody else the bird.
I think you said it though. It's going to be March Madness. Like, if March Madness brings in a ton of money, and if you suddenly just turn it into the Big Ten SEC challenge, like, you're not going to have nearly the money that you get, like you said, when you don't have Kansas and you don't have some of those bigger brands in there. And so I really think that's what stops them in other Olympic sports, right? Like, I know it would be great for the Big Ten and the SEC, like you said, to create their own kind of football thing, but I think there's a reason why they still fall under the NCAA with March Madness and the volleyball tournament and basketball and all those things. Because the Division I champion of NCAA football is not who wins the national championship that we think of, not the CFP. That's the FCS winner. And so I think what keeps them involved in stopping from becoming a semi-pro league, like you suggested, is going to be the other sports. I don't think that they're just going to stop sponsoring other sports. And if they do that, then they're going to have to still cooperate with the NCAA on a lot of things. And I think the NCAA makes it a little bit tougher if they do decide to just kind of have their own basketball tournament and create their own entity. I think the Olympic sports and basketball really could put a stop to them, not even thinking about it, but doing that overall.
I think the only thing I would add is the most likely outcome here. This is an uncomfortable thought, I'm sure, for the Rutgers and Northwestern and Vanderbilt fans out there right now, is that we'll see, I think, a decent chunk of the SEC and Big Ten shave themselves off somehow. Although, again, I think you pointed out correctly, Dustin, there's still some questions to be answered about how they do that without getting rid of something that's incredibly profitable like March Madness. But I really do see at some point, I don't know exactly the mechanisms of how, in 10 or so years, at least the beginning machinations of the real upper crust of college football teams trying to separate themselves from the rest of Division I FBS, which not a very comfortable place to think about it as a Cougar fan. As much as we love our school and stuff like that, I think it would take a very different 10 years than is what is most likely to happen for U of H to maybe land themselves in that hypothetical group of teams. So kind of shifting, but staying in this topic, I'm curious what you guys think of. I wouldn't say very deep in imminent and well-sourced reports at this point, but at least some chattering that Brett Yormark is still thinking about going to 18. So I guess I'll present to you guys this way. Let's say the Big 12 is going to 18 teams. That part is settled. We're not, entertaining, just for the sake of this, a decision not to expand. Who are the two teams out there right now that are semi-realistic adds? You can go get an ACC team or something if you want to go a little crazy, that you would add to the Big 12 right now, gets you to 18 teams, even though I think by nature 16 or 18 teams is kind of unwieldy as a total conference number. Let's say it's happening. Who are the two that you're picking and why?
No, I think it's a big question. Certainly, like you talked about, even just going to 16, there raises some big questions. Like, do you do divisions? Do you do pods? Do you do that differently for football versus other sports? There's a lot of questions. And there's, with the 16 teams currently in the Big 12, there's no real clear way to cut it into like pods or divisions. I don't know that's going to make everybody happy. I don't think it's going to be a little bit tricky. And certainly if you expand to 18, I think that only gets a little bit trickier, but we've already heard that, the presidents have allegedly pre-approved kind of at least base expansion efforts for Brett Yormark to, potentially look at adding teams 17 and 18 by this December. And certainly, some things to iron out there because, the Big 12 and that Fox had the media deal where they, did the pro rata increase for the new, P5 teams up until 16 or whatever. But, he's going to have to go back to the TV networks and talk to them about 17 and 18. But from the way I look at it and from what I've read in recruiting or in rumor mills, whatever, I think there's kind of four possibilities that I see. And I think the least appealing is Oregon State and San Diego State. I've already kind of seen that people going, I don't know about that. I mean, there's not a lot there. San Diego State, even when they've been good at things, don't draw a ton of eyeballs. Oregon State, okay, yeah, they're kind of on the up in terms of football right now, but is that a long-term thing versus the long-term, productivity of that athletics department? I don't know that that's somewhere you need to go. Stanford and Cal, I think, is a little bit more, semi-realistic. I wouldn't hate that move. I think it's more in the interest of adding brand names than it is adding programs that have been successful in football or men's hoops in recent years. But in terms of brand names, those are two huge brand names. Stanford and Cal are big names. It's certainly someone that I think Yormark can add to his inventory, then go to the networks and say, hey, people still want to watch Stanford and Cal. They're worth adding to your TV inventory. They give you the Pacific time zone that Brett Yormark allegedly really wants to get into. I feel like, in terms of TV value, those are two programs that even if they haven't been the best, aren't going to take away from the pie when it comes time to, renegotiate your TV deal. You get another huge rivalry game, obviously, to your inventory, where the Big 12 already has a lot of those. But I think that the two that I would most favor is, and I've seen this kicked around. I don't know if this would be a possibility, but I've seen people kicking around the idea of bringing in Gonzaga and UConn for basketball only. And, I think at this point it would make sense to, and I'm not sure this is going to happen because I don't know if it makes sense. I don't think it makes sense to the Big 12 to add UConn with football. And I don't think it makes sense for UConn to go to the Big 12 without football. But if you could pull those off and, not have to, because I mean, 16 for a football conference is already pretty unwieldy. 18 is a bit much. I think 18 is a little bit more doable for men's basketball because you can just give everyone, one permanent rival and you play them twice and you play everybody else once. And there's your 18-game schedule and you can at least still play everybody every year. But in terms of an already ridiculously stacked men's basketball conference, if you add two just elite programs like Gonzaga and UConn, you've got, Gonzaga, UConn, Houston, Kansas, Baylor, Arizona. That's at least six like elite tier basketball programs where the other 12 members of your conference at that point are almost all, the rest of them are almost all tier 1A programs. They'll be nipping right at their heels. So good Lord, that would be a ridiculous conference. You'd have the last three national champs. You'd have two of the last four runners up. So again, I will give this caveat. I don't know if that's even remotely feasible. I don't know if UConn is even taking our calls in terms of wanting to come over as a non-football member. But if you can do that, I think you jump all over that. And then I think the other best option is again, I kind of hate to say it because it kind of sucks for the long-term health of the sport, but waiting for the ACC to fracture in some number of years and see what's left from there and see if you can give them a better deal than what they've got after, maybe Florida State, Miami, and Clemson, North Carolina, whatever the case may be, leave for greener pastures. So I think that's a really intriguing possibility as well. Again, do I feel great about it? I don't, but if it's going to go that way, then, you can grab the next couple of best schools, whatever's available, and really just kind of fully cement yourself as not only the third best conference, but really the only third remaining power conference at all. You're in kind of a tier 1A by yourself at that point. So, I think some interesting possibilities. Wouldn't be surprised at all if we just see the Big 12 stay at 16. And I don't love going bigger because 16 is already kind of the point where it's like, okay, how much of an actual like coherent entity is this? I'm a bit excited about joining the Big 12. I like the idea of, feeling some pride in the conference and wanting to see the conference do well. If you get to like 18, 20 schools, all of a sudden it's like, okay, how much can you really feel the like cohesiveness as a conference? I don't know, but it's going to be awfully intriguing. And, I wouldn't bet on Brett Yormark being timid when it comes to potential expansion options down the road.
Right. I like adding Cal and Stanford just because the brand names, all that kind of stuff. To be honest, I really hate the idea of adding UConn and Gonzaga as like basketball members, just because like it's a great conference and we have all those great statistics you threw out, but like finishing 8th in a conference sounds awful, but like you'll be a 4 seed and it's like, that's cool and everything, but I prefer not to get my teeth kicked in every freaking game. Like it sounds awesome in theory, but just like
that's like Colorado and UCF are the conference.
It's just like, yeah,
Utah too.
It's just like, it sounds like fun in theory, but just every game is just like, oh my God, really? We got to play another top 15 team. Can't we just have one game? Like you'll be playing an NCAA tournament as your conference schedule. And it's like, pass. If you're going to add basketball only schools, I am avoiding UConn like the plague. Just the experience in the American with them was just a miserable experience. They think they're better than everybody else. They think they're better. If we're going to add basketball, give me St. Mary's and give me Gonzaga. Like I'll take St. Mary's over UConn. I freaking hate UConn. And like St. Mary's, it gives Gonzaga still their rival kind of deal. UConn was miserable in this conference, and all they'll do is bitch and complain that we were better off in the Big East, like they already did. And like, I hate to say it, it kind of paid off for them leaving, right? But like in terms of their basketball program, which is what they said they always cared about. So like, I don't want to be anywhere near UConn. And if the agreement is they have to come with football, I'd rather stay at 16 than even consider UConn for football. What about you, Sam?
I think Dustin essentially took I now that you've said your argument, I do kind of see that, yeah, like there are diminishing returns in terms of like, okay, but like if 66% of this conference is a really good team, it just means the schedule's going to be a bloodbath. And like, yes, I like, because we've been used to the opposite of that with the American, where there's maybe like 1.5 opponents that can give you a compelling matchup during the season, or 1.5 opponents where it's just like, oh, I'm not going to be miserable if we lose to this team. But I don't know. I'd still like to see it. I wish I had something worked up about adding Cal or Stanford and San Diego State just as like just for the road trip reasons, just so I could like do a weekend in the Bay Area and take the BART over the Bay to go see us play Cal and like men's basketball or football or something like that. San Diego
Palo Alto and Berkeley are beautiful, I will say.
They are. Yeah, they are. Palo Alto, a little further afield from San Francisco, but what, like an hour and a half-ish drive if you're not going at rush hour. So not too bad. So that would be my very stupid reason that is definitely less important than your guys' like actual, I think, very good foundational reasons for potentially going to 18, which I think we all, to some degree, I think we see eye to eye that probably like to say it's 16 for at least like some part of the future, but it's hard not to kind of see the writing on the wall that Yormark is at least thinking about a future with 8 teams. So I was going to say
it's shown that if you just sit around and don't do anything,
sure,
you end up like the Pac-12. So yeah. You have to do something. And you mean to tell me if the Big Ten, the ACC starts to split up, that the Big Ten's not going to make a couple of phone calls to Kansas to get that basketball program and to get those brands in there? Like, it's going to happen. So you got to stay ahead of the game.
No doubt. I was going to say, before we get into our Cougar topic of the night, and hopefully after this week get a temporary break from realignment talk, I think we should take a look at each of these 3 new schools briefly, individually. So I'm going to ask my co-hosts and myself 2 questions about each of the 3 newest additions to the Big 12. And those questions are, what we like about each school, kind of answering that, and what we don't like, or not even necessarily don't like, what we're maybe unsure of, what's kind of a big question mark to you about this program. So we're going to do this in alphabetical order. What do we like and what do we not like, or what are we not sure about, Dustin, with the Arizona Wildcats?
Yeah, I think the two things I like about them are kind of obvious. One, it gives you another elite men's hoops, program in a conference that's already doubling down on being the best men's hoops conference in the land. And number two is the international appeal. They're real close. I think it's like about an hour from the border with Mexico. Apparently, have a decent fan base down there, and that's something that Yormark has been very clear on, is wanting to really double down on the Big 12's international appeal and try to find new revenue streams by looking abroad. And I think Arizona is certainly a brand name that helps you accomplish that. And then, what I don't like is, again, it's kind of obvious. It's adding Colorado and now Arizona gives you two football programs that have, for the past decade plus, performed at a level considerably below basically everybody else in your conference. That doesn't mean that they'll play like that for the next 10 years, certainly. But I think the main appeal of the football product for the Big 12 going forward has been like, hey, everybody here is good. No one here is going to win a national title, most likely, but everyone here is good. That's fun for fans to watch. It helps with when you're selling yourself, I think, to TV partners or advertisers. You can say, hey, you can close your eyes, throw a dart, and at the Big 12 schedule, you're going to probably hit a game between two pretty good teams. It's pretty compelling. So I think adding Colorado and Arizona puts the conference in jeopardy of having a couple of football anchors where they weren't there before. And, hopefully Jed Fish and Deion Sanders do great and those programs thrive. Like I said, as we've said lots of times, what you did in the last 10 years isn't going to be the same thing as what you do for the next 10 years. But I think you get a couple football programs that you're a little bit more questionable about their long-term health versus most of the rest of the schools in the conference.
Yeah, I have to agree with your good. The basketball program, with its history and its prestige, just something you like to add into your conference, no matter who it is. But my negative is they do pretty well at Olympic sports too, and that sounds good, but it's just going to make those games more and more difficult. And again, I'm not saying that I want to go back to the American and I want everything easy, but just bloodbath after bloodbath where you have to play your A+ game every single week. They were top 50 baseball RPI. Like, it's just another school. And again, it's great, but at the same time, it's another school that has had financial things, benefits way longer than we have. They've been way ahead of us on in the money that they were bringing in. So they're just that much further ahead of us in all these things. And it's just, as much as I hate to say it, it just is going to take us that much longer to become a top flight contender in a lot of these sports. We talked about it last week, right? If you're going to win a conference championship, you got to be a top 15 program. And when we keep adding more programs, now it's pretty soon you're going to have to be a top 10 program. And I know it's fun being top 10 programs, but it's really freaking hard to be top 10 program in everything that you do.
Bobby with a bold, I don't want our conference to be too good takes for this.
Too good is
like
not
the porridge. It's got to be just right. If it's
yes,
too hot,
exactly.
It's too cold. Like,
exactly.
Not that
I would love to be top
co-signing.
5 in everything, but I also know we won't be. Okay. There's a little, last week I was riding on vibes. The vibes are crashing, guys. The vibes are crashing.
I can't, since we have a video component now, both posting it and also like amongst ourselves, I cannot wait to see your reaction to what my positive is, because I'm going to zig a bit here and say my positive is actually Arizona football right now. Yeah, great. I was going to say, delivered, Dustin. Okay, hear me out. I figured both of you guys would have basketball answers, and I agree this is a curious choice because this is a program that last had a winning season in 2017. They were 5-7 last year in a worse league than the one they're about to go into, at least football wise. But their third-year head coach, Jed Fish, really does seem to have cracked the code for that program in terms of recruiting at a fairly high level. They signed a top 25 class after his first year, despite being absolutely awful in the field. Dipped a bit last year, but not catastrophically. And they currently have the 30th rated class of 2024. They have the number 1 Arizona recruit, who's a consensus 5-star in the class. They also have the top offensive recruit in the state of Arizona as well, something that they've never been able to do before, just because Arizona is such a transplant heavy state that it's not really a state where kids dream of going to U of A or ASU, because chances are their parents came from California or some other part of the United States and transplanted sports allegiances and what have you. And Jed Fish, again, isn't going to have this coming in as the second or third best Big 12 football program, but I like that they finally have a staff in Tucson that has figured out how to recruit to a school that great basketball history, not as much on the football side, and recruiting has been specifically quite difficult. And I like that they might not be as much of an anchor as kind of like you alluded to, Dustin, by the time they reach the Big 12, acknowledging that I think the most right answer to this is basketball. What I don't like about Arizona, and again, I'm waiting for both of your reactions to this, went off the field entirely for this. So we'll just say, as somebody who's done the Texas to Las Vegas drive several times, Tucson is gross. Tucson, Bobby, to borrow something you say, is a real bad vibes kind of place. And I'm not saying this about the Arizona University campus, not saying that's gross or bad. The nature around there is actually quite beautiful. Have done some hiking at Pioche Peak State Park near there, but the city itself is gross. The city itself gives you the kind of vibe to where you're just like, I have to leave here as soon as possible. I need to be here to get gas or as a stop on a trip, but I need to not be here any longer than I absolutely have to be. That is the unmistakable vibe I have gotten the 4 to 5 times I've been in Tucson the last 4 years. So that's my negative here. Bobby, you're next up.
I just want to say, I didn't realize we were getting silly. I want to throw in there that Jed Fish, the head football coach for Arizona, very similar to when I grew up in Southern California, the local rock radio station, the world famous K-Rock, had a DJ named Jed the Fish. And every time I see Jed Fish's name, I hear the little banger for Jed the Fish's catch of the day when he would play
the Fish.
Some little indie song. It was his catch of the day. So that's going to be giving me good vibes about the Arizona program, even though they haven't
fantastic. No, always go silly to some degree on this show. Bobby, Arizona State, what do you like and not like about the Sun Devils?
Boy, I'm really glad we said silly, because my bad answer for Arizona State is definitely on the silly.
Were you worried that was going to cut and be like, Bobby, these need to be entirely sports answers? You are just absolutely throwing off this segment.
My bad, guys. That's what I'm here for, is to just derail segments all the time. Arizona State, big party school, and their games look like fun. I mean, when you watch it, it looks like a fun little road trip to take. The golf around there is great. So that's why I'm excited for Arizona State. I'm not going to say anything about their sports programs or anything like that. It's fine. I think you get to keep that rivalry. I think with a lot of these, and I'll talk about it with Utah, is just you're getting to keep some of these rivalries, and TV networks really like rivalry games. We're going to have a lot of contenders to replace the Red River Shootout. Then it will always be the Red River Shootout. I won't call it Showdown or anything like that ever. But TV networks like those, they draw eyes and gets good ratings. So that's going to be something that I'm really excited for, is when you bring the two of them in, you are going to get that rivalry game. And then, to be honest, the bad is they're hand sign thieves.
I knew you were going to go with the hand sign.
Yeah, they're just thieves. And like people on Twitter were like, and the Cougars have our hand sign, and it's like, no, you have ours. We beat you by 30 years. Like, that's just how it happens. So, and then this doesn't even really look like a trident. This does. So like, they could change it. It's fine. We have a story with ours. So that's why I'm anti ASU.
Yeah, so for ASU, the thing that I like most about ASU is they haven't been bad at football or men's basketball, and the thing that I don't like about ASU is they haven't been very good at football or men's basketball. Like they're fine, right? Like they're pretty good until last year when they had kind of a down football season. They'd kind of at least made a bowl every year for a while. Men's hoops has made 3 of the last 5 tournaments. Like Bobby said, it gives you a rivalry game in your inventory, which is good, but they're not overwhelmingly exciting. They're fine. They're fine.
They exist.
Yeah. Out of the 4 schools we're adding via the Pac-12, they're the ones that by a wide margin I have the least strong feelings about. I'm like, yeah, sure.
Right. So I promise this is the last one that I had that is about like the city instead of the athletic program, but kind of the opposite of my Tucson answer. I was, considering the on-field success has been kind of hit or miss with their higher profile programs, although like you said, Dustin, not necessarily bad by any stretch. I think consistently decent, I think, is probably the best adjective, at least until, in football's case, the bottom fell out last year. We'll just say Tempe is a pretty fantastic destination. This isn't me recommending visiting the Phoenix area between April and early October, because it's going to be hotter than the surface of the sun. But I was there. I stayed near Tempe with my significant other when we went for the Cougar season opening baseball tournament in 2022. And they really do a nice job, like the area around it. I mean, Tempe's obviously in a pretty major metro in Phoenix, but they make the area around the campus feel kind of college towny. Had good restaurants, good places to drink near there. If you're flying in, like chances are you are as a Cougar fan for the game, it's pretty close to Sky Harbor, which is the big airport in Phoenix. So it's a good road trip destination. That all checks the boxes, even if the sports teams don't do it exactly. And what I don't like about that school, I think, is the obvious, right? Arizona State's leadership, not the best. You have the athletic director whose chief qualifications for the job seem to be being Herm Edwards' agent at one time, who still somehow has outlasted Herm at the job, saying just dumb stuff about I'm not going to make the trip to Morgantown, and just like how I feel like I see every ASU fan online be like, oh yeah, our president and athletic director are just like walking embarrassments. Like we don't co-sign anything these guys say ever. Although apparently their president, Michael Crow, has done a good job on the academic side, but I think pretty clearly had to be dragged kicking and screaming from the Pac-12. So that's not great. I think that's one thing that probably ASU fans would agree has to change there. I think for that program to really meet its potential, even though they've done stuff like hiring Kenny Dillingham, a really, I think, promising young football coach, and making a lot of capital improvements. I think a lot of, in this, stop me if this sounds familiar, Cougar fans, a lot of potential, unrealized potential, like a lot of being referred to as a sleeping giant, but not having exactly the on-field results to match it. Heard that one a time or two about the old alma mater. All right, last but not least, Dustin, what do you like and not like about the addition of the Utah Utes?
I think I like a lot. I think this is one of the schools that I think the Big 12 should be really excited about adding. They've been really impressive at football, both prior to and also since joining the Pac-12 from the Mountain West. They are currently on a streak of winning back-to-back Pac-12 titles. They finished, football has, in the top 25 7 of the last 9 seasons, which is really impressive. And, it's a genuinely additive football new program to your conference, where I don't think any of the, I think you could argue that Arizona State, has been, and maybe Colorado and Arizona can be kind of not dilutive, but maybe just kind of another school in the conference. Utah is the one where I go, okay, that's actually a football brand that you're actually making your football product better with out of the 4. And I think that's probably the only one of the 4 new additions that you could really say that. And, I think kind of the other obvious is you get to add the Holy War as having that as a Big 12 matchup. That's huge. That's a game that, as a college sports fan, I've always made a point to watch anyway. Having that be in your Big 12 inventory can only be a good thing for the conference. And, and kind of like Arizona State, I think there's kind of a similar thing there where you can kind of say, oh, they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the Big 12. But I find it a little bit understandable, that the Pac-12 is the conference that kind of took them out of Mountain West oblivion. And, I think as much as a lot of us were kind of snarky towards the Big 12 before we got in, I think at this point we'd be kind of genuinely sad if bad things happened to the Big 12, given that, it finally became the conference that gave us the call up to the big league. So I understand the kind of loyalty there and not wanting to leave if you have a choice. So I won't really hold that against them. But, and I think the thing that I don't like is just how disappointing their men's basketball program has been basically the entire 21st century. They had a lot of good teams in the 1900s, especially late in the 1990s with Rick Majerus, had some really power programs there. And other than a little 2-year run under Larry Kristoviak, where they had a couple of basically 2 good teams back to back, other than that, they've been, kind of AWOL for much of the 21st century in terms of men's basketball. And kind of like I talked about with Arizona, this is a conference where the strength of it is you don't have really any anchors. And I think Utah has work to do to prove that they're not going to be the lone anchor that's going to just get kicked around by everybody in men's basketball. So even that, though, like I said, it's a conference that has some history, or it's a program, I should say, that has some history in men's basketball. I think that they can get there again. Certainly U of H is a program that has shown that, you can rely on you can maybe bank a little bit on your 20th century success to kind of rekindle that in the 21st century. But I think you do kind of have to stretch for things to not like about the Utah ad, because Salt Lake City looks like a beautiful city that I'd love to go visit and see a game at. The football program looks really exciting, like I said, and I think men's basketball has the potential to get back there. So there's not too much I don't like about the Utah ad.
So for me, brings the Holy War. That is what I put down, and Dustin mentioned it, but bringing in the Holy War is just a really big thing for TV revenue, things like that. I mentioned it with Arizona State. rivalry games just bring in a different level of viewership and excitement for the conference, and it's something that you can begin to promote as a big time game for your conference. And you put that game late in the season, you may have some fun weather, with it being in Utah. Plus, it could be for something. The BYU versus Utah game could be for a conference championship. A spot in the conference championship. It could be a preview of the conference championship. There's a lot that could go into that game. And so getting that on the TV schedule, it's mountain time zone, so you could play it a little bit later. So you take a primetime spot with it. It'll be primetime out there. It'll be, that 7:00 kickoff for the big rivalry game. I think with rivalry games, you either want to do early or you want to have that primetime spot. And if you do it the right time, you either make it the early kickoff or you make it the primetime kickoff. I think that's going to bring a lot of eyes to TV. And then the thing that I don't like, and I noticed this over Twitter over the weekend while I was flying back, I was able to get Wi-Fi on the plane, and man, their fans think they are better than everybody. It was eye-opening looking at those Utah fans just going like, we're going to run shop in this conference. And you're like, TCU literally made the national championship last year. And I know they're losing a lot this year, but like, this conference isn't going to be as easy as you guys think it is. It's still going to be a really good conference. So, that was what kind of threw me off about the Utah ad this week. And going forward, it was a holier than thou attitude, not a fun banter going back and forth like we have with other schools.
Yeah, I co-sign what you guys said about the Holy War and Utah just being a generally very, very good college football program. That stadium that they have, Rice Eccles, I think up there with Oregon is best college football atmospheres, like west of the Rockies. I think that's your 1A and 1B right there. I've just heard what a hard place that is to go in. You saw USC's, I know they could have out of the Pac-12 championship game, but you saw USC's easy path to the playoff die last year in Salt Lake City as a hard place to go play. And I think the Big 12 was already very rich in cool home football atmospheres. And I think Rice Eccles just adds another one to it. And don't have a ton new to Attaboy I don't like. The football is great. No complaints there. But I think it's the question of what other Utah athletic program is really exciting right now. They've done some stuff historically that you talked about, Dustin, in men's hoops, but haven't had a winning Pac-12 conference record since 2019. Women's basketball has been good recently, but not consistently successful this century by any stretch. It's not the bat and ball sport. So, I mean, what is it? I get that football makes the biggest impact here, but I think it's fair to ask who are going to be the successful non-football teams in this athletic department, though you could rephrase that question at U of H right now, just replacing football with men's basketball. So not going to throw too many stones in my glass house, but that's what I thought about the Utes. That's what we think about this expansion. Fellas, is everyone ready to talk Cougar football, or do we got some final expansion thoughts?
Let's do it.
Let's talk Cougar football.
Had to talk expansion again, I'd be happy.
Exactly. I think you will at some point, but I would personally.
It gives me tired head, man. I'm just like, can we just play football now?
Yeah, can we get like a
now that we're on the
good
side,
from this?
Now that we're on the side that is in the conference, it's like, okay,
I don't mind if it comes back in
tired.
June of next year, June of 2024. Like after the college sports season, it's fine. You know what? Distract me from the no.
I'm ready to play
sports.
some games. Ready to play some games.
Using that word vibe again, I don't think we could argue that the vibe for Cougar defense was pretty bad after last season's. The defense that finished 99th in SP Plus, a ranking that, frankly, I think was inflated a bit by two pretty decent performances at the start of the year against good offenses. The pass defense was disastrously bad after losing Marcus Jones to Marion Williams. Run defense was better, but still had some pretty awful games against Kansas and SMU. The pass rush had its moments, especially when Derek Parrish was healthy early in the season, but wasn't getting to opposing quarterbacks nearly often enough. To be blunt, most of the defensive backs the staff recruited last year didn't look like effective starting Division I players. I think the on-field results bore that out. So with all that very pleasant stuff in mind, what are everyone's initial thoughts about the Cougar defense going into a season where the schedule only gets more challenging?
Yeah, it's intimidating for sure. I remember a year ago when we were previewing the defense, we're like, wow, Cougar defense is coming off of like a top 25 season. Are they going to be able to improve even on that? And
I listened to it and I was like, this is like a different time. I can't imagine feeling this way, but I mean, I think we justifiably did.
Yeah. So that was rough. I mean, last year, you said it, Sam. It was a big struggle, and it's not like Houston doesn't lose any talented players off of a unit that was already struggling. They certainly do, as we're going to probably go position by position and talk about some of those guys that are no longer around. And oh yeah, they're going to go face a way tougher schedule this year than they did a year ago. So, I do like the transfer crop that came in on the defensive side of the ball. I can certainly see a way forward that this ends up being a pretty decent defense this year, but I think that requires a whole lot of questions being answered in the affirmative, a whole lot of positive development happening over the offseason, and a heck of a lot better injury luck than you had last year. So, like I said, is it possible this is a decent defense, one that's able to kind of hold up its end of the bargain and doesn't maybe get really blown out more than maybe a couple of times in Big 12 conference play? Yeah, I think it's possible, but I think you have to be realistic and acknowledge that there are some fairly disastrous outcomes that are on the table as well.
Yeah, I don't really see how this defense can get much worse, though. I mean, it was bad in every facet of the game on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I do think the injury luck, like you said, Dustin, is going to play a huge role, right? Last year, we were kind of depending on the defensive line to apply some pressure to quarterbacks and maybe take some of that pressure off the defensive backs. They wouldn't have to defend as much. And then, Parrish has 5 sacks in 4 games. And then next thing you know, he goes out injured and we're just getting no pressure on the quarterback. And we're really depending on our defensive backs that, as you said, didn't look as good as we were probably hoping that they were recruited. And so there are a lot of questions to be answered this year. So if you think this defense is going to be good, those questions are answered in the affirmative. The transfers work out exactly how you think they're going to. We'll mention it later. A couple of position changes work out exactly like you think it's going to, and everything's going to be perfect. And you could see a way that this defense is decent, not bad. I don't see this defense being like exceptionally good like they were a couple of years ago, where we were good at getting to the quarterback. We were good at making plays in the defensive backfield. I don't know if I see that, especially with the harder schedule, but if the questions are answered in the affirmative, I think this defense can be pretty good.
I didn't realize this. I knew a number of the key guys from last year were gone. I didn't realize until I looked at 6 of your top 7 tacklers are gone. Last year's leaders in sacks, interceptions, forced fumbles, and sometimes lost production off of a bad defense is overrated. And I think that's at least somewhat true here. But some of those guys who graduate are good football players. Javarius Owens, Derek Parrish, DeAnthony Jones, Donovan Butin. I'm not going to get on here and say those guys aren't good football players, because we saw it over points of their career. Just unfortunately, those guys plus everyone else in the defense didn't add up to anything better than, unfortunately, one of the worst defenses in the country. You lose one of your few projected returning starters, Manny Nunnery, to Florida as well. Not saying he was the complete product, but probably not someone you wanted to lose, considering I think any experience you have returning is pretty precious when you're trying to do a turnaround as challenging as Doug Belk and the Cougars are facing this year. But I figured we'd start with the defensive line if nobody disagrees with that. And I think we should talk up defensive line coach Brian Early in his 5th season with the Cougars. Along with Doug Belk, the only remaining on-field assistants from Holgerson's original staff here, though we'll note that Dakeil Shorts and Mark Scott were both on staff in analyst development type roles. For any of the defensive failings last year, I don't think you'd find many Cougar fans who are aware of Brian Early and aren't still generally having a positive feeling about his work. I think one of the really few positive moments of the offseason besides the recruiting class was Early not taking a job on the Colorado staff, as was rumored for a minute or so in February. A guy who came in with a reputation of developing defensive linemen from his last job. And I think we've seen it here. Guys like Peyton Turner, Logan Hall, and DeAnthony Jones, who have gotten a lot better since working under Brian Early. And I think the guy who I'm really interested to watch this year, I kind of start out here, is Nelson Caesar, a guy. He's your top returning pass rusher and edge guy. Had 4 sacks in 13 games, which doesn't scream at you, but was second on the team in tackles for loss, blocked a kick, had a critical fumble return touchdown, which ended up being the winning score in that uncomfortable Bayou bucket game against Rice. It was great as a top 50 edge rusher in the country by Pro Football Focus, was a big recruit in his class back in 2019. It's been nice to start to see the talent show itself in the last season or so, but I think any scenario where the Houston Cougar defense takes a big step forward, I think that kind of hinges on Nelson Caesar or somebody we're not thinking of, but I think most likely Nelson Caesar really having a big breakout 2023 season.
Yeah, I think the defensive line wasn't the defensive line definitely took a step back last year, but it was, I think, still clearly the best unit on the defense, which is kind of damning with faint praise because it wasn't a very good defense. But like I said, and you're losing Derek Parrish, you're losing DeAnthony Jones off that line, although you didn't have Derek Parrish for most of the year last year. That was a big part of the problem, I think. But I do like some of the guys Houston has on the line. I think it has the potential to be a really disruptive line. And like you said, Sam, I think that Nelson Caesar at one of the defensive end positions is a huge part of that. And I think the other part of that is the guy that I kind of expect will start at the other defensive end position, and that's David Ugwebu from Oklahoma, the transfer from OU. Seven Lakes High School product, returns home after a pretty productive 4-year career as an outside linebacker at Oklahoma. Wanted to prove to the NFL that he can be a rush end, and would love nothing more than for him to be an NFL prospect for one season with the Cougs. And we've certainly heard some good things from the staff about Ugwebu at the rush end. But and I think if you get those two guys at the end, and I think kind of your projected guys, Chidozie Wonkwa in the interior along with Cedric Williams. Wonkwa is a guy that I think that maybe we haven't talked enough about on the podcast. Has been remarkable coming in. Played right away as a true freshman, has just been not just a space eater in the interior defensive line, but someone who can be a real disruptor as well. And then Cedric Williams, someone who looks like is also expected to start a defensive tackle, was finally healthy this past year after COVID and injuries taking him out the majority of the last 2 seasons. And he's another guy that, I love the idea of him having a healthy offseason off of a healthy season, working with Brian Early to really, get to work on it. I like those guys. I think all 4 of those guys can be really disruptive, important pieces on the defensive line.
Yeah, I don't have everything I have written down on my notes. You guys have covered, right? I think Ugwebu's going to come in, and anybody who can play that many snaps at Oklahoma, albeit a Oklahoma program that was a little down last year, I think, which is a nice way to say it. I think anybody who has that level of talent and can play there, I think is somebody you should be excited about. And I think last year, like you said, Dustin, the side. So, and they lost a lot of talent, right? You lose Parrish. He's still a big loss, even though he didn't play a lot last year. It's just like we said about, our general defensive thoughts is there's a lot of question marks, but I like what we're doing with the defensive line. And I think the defensive line, if we can get them to do, I think they have the talent to do what we wanted them to do last year in terms of getting to the quarterback quick so that our defensive backs aren't as exposed. I think they really have the ability to do that. And I think we could see that this year. And if that happens, we're going to see success all around. I know breaking news there, getting to the quarterback equals good defenses, but it's going to help other units as well.
Yeah. From what I gathered,
I do think I was going to say with our secondary being as cobbled together as it is, I think it makes it even more important that the defensive line be productive.
Yeah, from what I heard, Ugwebu wasn't a perfect fit playing, I think, further inside at linebacker. For the Sooners, I'm really interested to see if making him more of a pass rushing specialist, so that equates to him being a more effective player, because it certainly seems like the talent and leadership are there. A few guys who were on the roster last year or didn't play very much, who I'm interested in, are Nadeem Tucker and Zakiya Strong, who both came in before last season with good recruiting pedigrees, but both redshirted last year. Brandon Mack, a transfer from Ole Miss, could be one to watch from that second group of guys as well. And that, like you guys, I like Wonkwo and Williams both returning in the interior. Jamari Caldwell was UH's highest rated interior guy, is also back. Got to watch the future, I think. A couple of guys, actually. AJ Holmes was in the 2022 class. The staff really liked him, and they made an effort to play him in few enough games that he redshirted last year, but you could tell they were getting as long of a look at him as they possibly could, especially with, again, the Cougar defensive line not being that great. You maybe not losing that much by giving a true freshman some rotation reps, but wouldn't be surprised if you see him take on a bigger role this coming year with Wonkwo and Williams. Certainly not going to be playing every defensive snap for you. And another guy who I don't think we'll see a ton of in 2023, but a name to kind of file away for the future is Justin Benton, the Cougars' highest rated defensive recruit in this most recent class. A guy projects to be an interior D lineman for the long term. So I think with this group, there's a good combination of experienced guys and intriguing newcomers. I think it gets a bit scarier if some of your more proven guys like Caesar or Wonkwo miss extended time hurt. But I mean, you could say that about any position group. And again, I think staying healthy on the line is always a scary proposition, whether you're talking about defensive or offensive line, just the contact those guys take at that position. But I think assuming perfect health is impossible, but assuming pretty good health where most of your key guys play most of the season, I do like what the Cougars have up front. I like it with fewer qualifiers than the secondary or the linebackers. I mean, I think it's the deepest of your position groups, and it's a good one to be deep in because, just inevitably, a guy or two is going to get dinged up and you're not going to have him for the full 12 or 13 games of the season.
I am really intrigued to see how the line depth plays out because, like I said, I feel more confident in the starting four than I do in the guys behind them. And traditionally, under Brian Early, the Sac Avenue thing, it's been all about the rotation. It's been rotating like 9, 10, 11 guys in there. Yep. And I'm curious to see who those guys are. I like you, Sam. I think Anthony Holmes Jr., another guy that I'm really, really intrigued by. Took the redshirt. Actually was able to play 5 games because he got a waiver to play in the bowl game. So he got to play in 5 games last year. But still,
which tells you the staff wanted to see him as much as possible.
Got 156 snaps, which is pretty good for a redshirt season. And I actually saw this among AAC interior defensive linemen who hit the 150 snap minimum, which he admittedly barely hit. But, among that group, he was Pro Football Focus ranked him the 4th best overall interior defensive lineman in the conference last year. So wow. that tells you that in the snaps that he got, that he was doing some good things. And certainly someone who, like along with Caldwell, like you said, I think I'm intrigued. It's not that I don't have any confidence whatsoever in the depth on the line. There's definitely some guys to like. Mac, I'm hoping, Tucker, Strong, Justin Beatles, 3 guys that were all here, but none of them got a sack last year. I think you need to see at least 1 or 2 of those guys be more of a meaningful rotation piece here. So definitely intrigued to see how the depth plays out on the defensive line. Cause like you said, that's kind of always been the strength of that group.
And I mean, Holgerson, I think it was today, maybe yesterday, where he said Sac Avenue's not dead. So there seems to be a lot of confidence coming from the coaching staff as to what this defensive line can do as well.
No doubt. So next up are the Cougar linebackers, who are going to look a bit different in the coming season with the departure of long time starter Donovan Butin, coached for a 3rd season by Archie McDaniel, who was previously the co-DC and linebackers coach at Texas State. U of H generally plays an alignment that features 2 linebackers, but also rotates a fair amount. So I'm sure we're going to see more than 2 of the guys we talked about regularly get on field for the coming season. The guy I'm most intrigued about is one of the oldest guys in this roster, Hassan Hippolyte, who has largely played at safety prior in his Cougar career. Moving to linebacker for the coming season, didn't grade out super well as a safety, but will be asked to do a bit less in terms of coverage of his new position, and you would assume the Cougar staff has gotten to see obviously a lot more than the 3 of us, but gets to see more from anyone else, and thought the position change would go well. And it certainly sounds like it's gone well enough that we could expect him to be a starter in week 1. So I guess I would ask you guys, who are the intriguing names that you're watching at this position coming out of camp?
Yeah, same for me. I really think that it's going to be all about the position changes, right? You got Hogan and Hippolyte both changing their position, and I think that's going to be, if they're successful, then I think the linebacking core is going to be successful overall. I know Hippolyte was at media days, and he was talking about how he approached the coaches, and he said, I like playing around the line a little bit more. We got some guys coming in the secondary that I think, frankly, he saw the writing was kind of on the wall. He was like, I don't really like doing this coverage thing. I like hitting people. And so with that, he approached the coaches, is what he said, and said, hey, in their exit meetings, he kind of approached them and said, hey, what would it look like for me to kind of move to linebacker? And so I really think that those position changes, if those are successful, I think this linebacking core, they're going to fly to the ball. I remember just something that has always kind of stuck out to me is a couple of years ago when we had that really, really good defense, and I think it was 2021. There always seemed to be 7 or 8 red helmets around the ball, like U of H helmets around the ball. We flew to the ball. We went after the ball. There was just a lot of Cougars around the ball, and they were flying to it. And so I really think if these guys are going to bring a little bit of speed and things like that to the linebacking core, I hope that we see this swarming to the ball again. So.
Yeah, I think with the linebackers losing Donovan Butin to graduation and Manny Nunnery to the transfer portal and ultimately Florida, this is one of the groups I'm, most concerned about. There's a lot of guys I feel like could be impact players, but I don't know if there's anybody that I'm sure will be. I think the guy that I would probably put my strongest bet on would be Malik Robinson. And even in his case, he's coming off of a season where he was injured in the second game and didn't play the rest of the year, which was a shame because I felt like he was kind of really up for a breakout season last year. And I think he was another one of those injuries that really hurt U of H's season-long defense with him being out. And he was, starting a weak side linebacker alongside Muton, who was at the Mike spot, but with Muton gone and Robinson being tied for the heftiest U of H linebacker at 230 pounds listed, I think he likely moves to the middle. And then probably I would guess Hippolyte starts at the will position if for, no other reason than, I know he wanted to move, but, with the secondary needing bodies the way it is, and certainly they've made a lot of additions and stuff, but, I don't think the staff maybe is eager to move him if they don't feel pretty good about who they've got in the secondary. So I think that, the fact that they're willing to move him means that they're, if not starter, at least going to give him a significant snaps. Former safety certainly seems more suited to the outside linebacker position with Robinson in the middle, kind of like I guess I mentioned there. So I think it makes sense there too. Some other guys, Jamal Morris, Tremarcus Cheeks, both those guys got a couple starts at the will spot last year after Robinson's injury. I don't know if either of them did enough to really lay down a marker to be the starter again next year, but it's all about how do they progress over the offseason and things like that. A couple of transfers there. And then, Traylon Payne, guy made 12 appearances, including one start last year as a true freshman. So certainly not sure, if that means he's still kind of providing depth this year, if he's ready to move into a starting role, but someone definitely that I'm keeping an eye on for the long run there.
I don't think he'll start, but another guy I'm keeping an eye on is Aaron Willis. You could tell last year the staff was kind of doing like they did with AJ Holmes and trying to preserve his red shirt after he played in a bunch of games. As first program Tennessee and lost that redshirt year, was a consensus 4-star recruit, one of the highest that Tennessee brought in under Jeremy Pruitt, but never got to play under Pruitt's staff because of his sudden dismissal after the 2020 season. Was a missile on special teams last year. Again, I think I agree with you, Dustin. Hippolyte and Robinson are the two guys I expect to see the top of the depth chart once we finally have a depth chart. I'm guessing UTSA week for the defensive side of the ball, but he was a missile on special teams. I'm excited to see what that guy can do with regular reps now that the staff's not trying to preserve his red shirt now that he's in the mix with all the guys you mentioned, Cheek, Payne, Morris, and the two, I think, projected starters. I think that's the guy I'm most excited to see if he gets into that regular rotation for the coming season, and whether or not, maybe the staff can sculpt something there and the guy's a potential future starter.
Yeah, and then finally, I think we do have to talk about the secondary, and I think no unit.
We have to talk about it.
We have to talk about it. No unit struggled more in Houston's defense last year. No unit got a more extreme makeover in the offseason than did the defensive backs. So, the one hand, I think, kind of like Bobby said with the defense as a whole, there's nowhere to go it up. You can't play a whole lot worse than you did last year. And some of the additions I think are really exciting. On the other hand, we're about to play a really tough schedule. A lot of teams that like to air the ball out. So, this secondary is going to be tested, and there's going to be a lot of tests for a kind of reconstituted secondary. So, not a whole lot of returning guys that saw any significant snaps in the secondary last year for U of H. I think Alex Hogan, Jalen Emery, Antonio Brooks are the only three that really saw any snaps that are coming back. Although Joseph Duarte's article from today also mentioned a couple of other guys that were on the roster last year that could see action this year. Dorian Friend, who took a red shirt last year, saw no action, was listed. Moses Alexander, who was with the program last year, was a really, really highly rated JUCO transfer who I think we all thought was going to compete for snaps, but ended up being academically ineligible. So this year sounds like he's got everything in order. So, I think it's not a complete and total from the studs rebuild. This is definitely a secondary where you have to feel like, probably, coming into spring ball, into fall practice, probably no one really had a starting spot nailed down.
And it had to be. It really, really had to be a pretty drastic makeover because it was a terrible pass defense last year. I think the defense as a whole, and it's oversimplifying to say that teams don't succeed or fail based on individuals. It's usually a team effort. If the defense is bad, it's usually because multiple components contributed to being bad. But I mean, it hurt clearly last year's defense, losing Demarion Williams, losing Marcus Jones, and a couple of guys that I really like that they brought in to address this. AJ Halsey, last year as a true freshman, started most of that year, was a freshman All-American for the Lobos, wasn't just a guy who played a lot on a bad defense, was one of the highest graded freshman defensive backs in the country. Is originally a Houston area kid too, played at Marshall High School down in Fort Bend with some other current Cougars. Brian George is also a really intriguing name, an older guy, started 8 games in 3 seasons, which was, because of health, ended up being, I think, roughly 40% of the games that he was active for A&M, had some injury problems, which I guess that's kind of the concern there, but was able to get on the field a fair amount for some very good Aggie defenses, including a couple under Mike Elko, a really highly regarded defensive coordinator who's now a really highly regarded head coach of Duke. Had one of, I think, the best first years we've seen in a good while, and someone, again, very universally acknowledged as a great defensive mind. And this guy was able to get on the field for multiple Mike Elko defenses, I think, is a good endorsement of Brian George. Was also a JUCO All-American at Highland Community College, teammate of Demarion Williams at one time. Prior to that, and the other guy I want to mention, Isaiah Hamilton from TSU, had 5 INTs last year for what was one of the better FCS defenses out there, had 2 pick sixes, was an HBCU All-American and first team All-Conference, about to make obviously a pretty titanic jump from the SWAC to the Big 12, but it wouldn't be entirely untreaded ground for a guy to tear it up the FCS and then kind of, I guess the college football market kind of realized that, hey, this guy developed a bit later. This guy had maybe some undiscovered talent that needed a few years in college and is really at this point an FBS player. So I think he excites me. George excites me. And AJ Halsey, who I think really sounds like has locked down with the safety spots, excite me as well.
Yeah, to be honest, you guys covered everything I have written down here in my notes. I think the biggest thing is just like I think the Hippolyte question mark, if that change works out, it's going to be the same with all the transfers. There's some guys in here that you guys mentioned that have been successful at other stops, but does it translate over here? There is, as much as it pains me to say, there's a reason why they transferred out, and let's see if a change of scenery kind of coming back home is going to help a lot of these guys out. So there's a lot of question marks in the secondary, but as we said, it can only go up from here.
Yeah, I'll go back to the piece that JD had today where he talked about the rotation for, I think the defensive staff still kind of figuring out who's playing cornerback, who's playing nickel. Kind of mentioned some rotation there. Alex Hogan going to be part of that rotation for sure. I mentioned Jalen Emery, who was, I think, maybe your prototypical, got thrown into the fire too early as a freshman last year, and then maybe that pays off towards him being a little more experienced this time around. And then, Sam, you mentioned a couple of the transfers: Brian George, Isaiah Hamilton. I mentioned Moses Alexander, the JUCO from a year ago as well. But I think the one guy who I'm surprised we've gotten this far without talking about is Malik Fleming, who was one of the AAC's best corners last year with East Carolina.
Big miss on my part. I'm sorry.
I'd be awfully surprised if he's not starting somewhere in the secondary, just because that was, I think, right up there with Halsey, one of the secondary transfers that I'm really excited about. And then I think we see some positional versatility with some of these guys. So I think maybe one or two of those guys that I mentioned see some time at safety, but I think they're all maybe in the kind of the corner nickel rotation there. And I'm a little curious to see how the safety rotation works out, because certainly Halsey, I'd be stunned if he's not starting at one of the safety spots. But then after that, maybe you're talking about Antonio Brooks, a guy who got hurt last year in his 3rd year at U of H after being a highly rated JUCO transfer. I'd love to kind of see him kind of step up. And I believe he's now in his last year of eligibility. Juwan Gaston, a pretty intriguing JUCO transfer who came in at the safety position as well. So, again, you go back to, you don't exactly know where all these guys are going to play. And certainly you believe some of these guys probably have some positional versatility, but in terms of my best guess where these guys are going to end up, I think there's a little bit more depth maybe at cornerback than safety, in my opinion. But I think Halsey is maybe the single defensive back that I'm most excited about coming off of a freshman All-American campaign, like Sam mentions. And like I mentioned earlier, I think the staff being happy to move Hippolyte to linebacker tells me that they like what they have at safety. So we'll certainly see. I think personnel-wise, I'm a lot more excited about this defensive back group now than I was, at the end of last football season, looking at what we had coming back. I think they've done a good job of addressing that position in the transfer portal, but lots of questions still remain for sure.
It really feels like we just have like 8 guys, and we're just like 4 of you go out, like 2 corners, 2, the nickel guy. I need 5 of you out there. Y'all figure out where you're going to play. Like, it just really has that feeling that we just have 8, 9 guys who just all feel kind of like the same player. And you're just like, who's playing well today? Go. Who is in a little bit better health? You guys go out. I need you guys to play today. And there's just going to be a rotation of guys just coming in and out, and they're just going to have to be able to play anywhere in the secondary.
Like, there's 8 of you. Hopefully 4 or 5 of you have proven to be good football players by now, right?
Right.
All right. I think we got to get to the portion of the show that everyone's been waiting for. Some specialist talk, special teams. We're talking
Scott
kicking.
Street specialist shout out there.
We're talking kicking. We're talking snapping. We're talking everything that's happening over there, guys. The best compliment I can pay the Cougars returning starter, Gavin Gately, is that I can't remember too many disastrously bad snaps in the last years. I know there's a lot of positions out there. Snapper is not alone in being one of those. If you don't get noticed, it's good positions, but I think that's the most, if no one knows who you are, that is the best endorsement of what you're doing. I know who you are, Gavin Gately, but that's because I'm a sick fuck who does a podcast about U of H and follows this program incredibly closely. So I would add that, but I would say with that, I think real certainty that what you're getting from Gavin Gately, good snapping. I think place kicker is a big question mark. It was a big question mark last year. And as I put together my thoughts for this, I don't think my questions were answered. I think, who knows, Jack Martin or Cooper Hamilton or Joseph Kim could have having a surprisingly good 2023. I'm not betting on it, with all respect to those three gentlemen. And it was unfortunately a kicking game that you did have some highlights there. You did have Kyle Ramsey's just immaculate onside kick that helped you complete the insane comeback against Memphis, but it wasn't a kicking game that you could rely on to hit deep shots. It wasn't a kicking game you rely on to be at least consistent inside of 35 or 40 yards. And I think pretty frustrating there. And I don't know if we've seen a lot of really clear answers to that question in the offseason. Something that in a season where you're trying to win a lot of like close kind of toss-up-y games, you don't want to say something's going to come back to bite you until you actually see it happen. But feels like one of those little areas that you're worried about on the margins, where if U of H loses a game by 2 or 3 where the place kicking was unreliable, really just, I think it's kind of a bitter pill to swallow. So not saying I'm there yet, but that was kind of the doomsday scenario I was like putting together in my head with my notes.
Yeah, I'm more than a little bit nervous about the special teams, because you mentioned, Houston gets Gavin Gately back, the long snapper. They also get punter. Lane Wilkins is back, but you lose last year's kickers, you lose that last year's primary kick returner, you lose last year's primary punt returner. You get Wilkins, you get Gately, you get, your secondary kick return man, Peyton Sawyer, back. Matthew Golden also returned some kicks last year. And, starting with Wilkins, someone that we do have coming back, I like what we've seen from him. He's been solid. I think we saw his punt average bump up a little bit this past year. That's exciting. And, looking at our previous Aussie punter, Dane Roy was kind of good for 3 years, marginally getting better. And then all of a sudden he just was amazing as a senior. And so no pressure on Lane Wilkins, who's now entering his 4th year with the program and has kind of gotten marginally better each of the past 2 seasons. Even if he can't fully replicate Dane Roy's unreal 2019 season, I'd love for him to see, for him to at least find a new level in his own game. Got the couple of kickers. I think Jack Martin, the Alabama transfer, probably seems like the most likely to have the kicking duties. He spent the past 2 seasons with the Crimson Tide after spending the previous 2 at Troy. But most of his collegiate experiences with kickoffs, not a ton of field goal kicking experience there. So don't really know what to make from that. And, if you're a college football fan, and if you have been for any period of time, that kickers change the outcomes of games quite often, for better and for worse. We've seen the Matthew Hogan, game-winning kick. We've seen kickers lose games, as well. It happens across college football every year. So that's, I think, a huge, X factor that could swing a game or 2 here or there. And then, in terms of returners, like I said, I kind of assume Peyton Sawyer gets some reps again. Wouldn't be surprised if they maybe don't want to risk Matthew Golden, but, they did have Tank Dell returning punts last year. So who knows? I think predicting who's going to be returning kicks is always kind of a crapshoot until they go out there. So I guess we'll kind of see how that goes. But, like I said, I think there's some things, and this is kind of, I feel like we keep repeating ourselves for every position group here. It's like, there's some things to like, but there's also some big questions that I'm just not sure how those are going to turn out.
Yeah, for me, over the last year, the stats speak a little bit different than how I felt watching the games. And I know that's a weird thing to kind of say, like stats versus how you feel. Like, there was never a time where I was like, oh my God, we got this chip shot field goal and there's just no way he makes this. And then like he missed it. And there's probably a couple that like I just blocked out of my memory because I don't want to remember them, but it would never felt like this was like a super emergency, but then, or like this super bad thing where, we play ECU in 2007. I'm going to keep reminding everybody of that game where, we're just going to miss 5 and break our hearts. It just never felt like that, but it did.
I intentionally didn't mention that game when I was talking about field goal swinging games either way.
I was thinking about that when you said Matthew Hogan,
yeah.
Matthew Hogan hitting a game winner against Tulsa. TJ Lawrence missing 3 against ECU.
And so it's just like, I haven't had that feeling, and this year feels like we could have that feeling just because it is such an unknown. It's like, what's going to happen the first couple of weeks? We're in a close game versus UTSA, and you're just kind of like, oh God. Okay, he made it. All right, cool. Or or he'll miss the first two versus UTSA, and then every time he walks out, you're just like, no, no. Oh God, not a 25-yarder. Please, God, no.
We're gonna hashtag college kickers this again, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. And so, like you said, Dustin, there's a lot of question marks, but I'm hoping that I still have this weird confidence whenever he comes out. It's like, okay, I think last year I didn't dive too deep into the misses and the makes, but it felt like he missed a lot of long ones that he like a college kicker. You're like, okay, he missed it. Like, it's all right. And he made the ones that we needed him to make. And so hopefully this year we get that same confidence with the Alabama kid.
Yeah, I would say probably the most likely outcomes we get something like last year. It wasn't spectacular, but it wasn't terrible. It was like a C grade kicking game that didn't really swing an outcome in a negative way, but also wasn't a nice weapon that you could rely on in a potentially close game against an opponent that maybe you didn't expect to be such a close game against. So the only thing I would also know is that Malik Fleming, the cornerback that we know previously, did return punts from ECU last year. So I would say it's probably one of those names to watch there. Didn't have a touchdown last year, but did have a 60-yarder and a 28-yarder. So I think that's good. Tank Dell, losing him as punt returner is one of those underrated things. So you think about Tank Dell and you think about this guy who was just an absolutely fantastic receiver for 3 years, but the guy also should have had 3 punt return touchdowns last year. It just, but for that awful call against UTSA and that awful but very correct call against Texas Tech, we're talking about a guy who has 3 return touchdowns. So again, the standard for return guys here is just absurdly high. The guys we've had in this program the last 10-ish years, Tyron Carrier, Marquez Stevenson, Marcus Jones, maybe the gold standard of college return guys in the last couple decades, and Tank Dell, I think somebody who had that as a very overlooked part of his overall excellent game. So we've gotten kind of spoiled here. And with all respect to Malik Fleming, who had a couple of nice returns last year, but wasn't an ECU punt return guy before last season, maybe not a season where we have a return touchdown, which again, in a season where I think we expect some games to have tight margins and for UH to have to really kind of squeak to get to that 5, 6, 7 win place that we'd like to see him get to, that's not going to be the best, but I can't hold it against the staff because for all the faults of the last several seasons, I think return game has not been among that. So that's all the Cougar defensive and special teams thoughts I have, guys. What are we feeling? Are the vibes better, the same, worse? How are we feeling after all that?
I just like that I've brought vibes to the podcast. That makes me. I feel
The
very
vibey podcast in season 9.
Go ahead, Dustin.
No. I don't have much other than I don't know what to expect, and I didn't before I started really diving into this roster. I didn't quite know what to expect from the football program this year, and now that I've dived in, I still have no idea what to expect from the football program this year. I think I broadly expect us to be a better football team than we were last year. But I don't know by how much, and I don't know what that's going to mean facing the schedule that we're going to face. So it's going to be, I think, a lot of, kind of like I said last week, is, it's maybe more exciting for me to be going into a season where you don't have real high expectations, knowing that that's kind of where U of H tends to traditionally thrive.
Yeah, I think this defense could be like top 60, or it could be where it was last year. It's just, how do the position changes, how do the transfers come in, and how does the D-line with their experience, even though you lost a lot, you still have an experienced D-line. How do they look? Do they stay healthy? I think this could be a solid defense, or this could be an awful defense. I don't see there being, anything in between. I think it's either going to be a lot of heartbreak, or it's going to be, oh, this defense is actually a lot better than we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, the unknown is always exciting, but as you're kind of talking yourself into the scenarios, that not all these new guys are gonna be hits. Not all these guys are gonna turn into good or above average Big 12 defensive backs. That's not how this works. Even with this staff being able to recruit to the Big 12, just inevitably some of these guys just aren't going to pan out to the degree that you need them to for this to be a really, really above average secondary. I don't hate that they've had an off season of the staff being able to tell them like, hey, this wasn't good enough last year. The returning guys can have a little bit of, I guess, like fire under them that, hey, like I don't want last season to define my college career. And these new guys have a chance to come in here and be like, hey, we can come in here and change this culture. We can come in here and change what Houston Cougar defense is. it's just a very scary thought against the schedule we're about to go against, that you're breaking in so many new faces, and at pretty much every level we talked about tonight, there's somebody new there. So that's a little scary, but I do think if I had to bet that this will be a better defense than last year. Will it be dramatically better? Will this be like the 85th SP plus defenses of the 99th? I don't know, man. Like that's the scary thing. And that's with this much unknown. I think let's keep my expectations, I guess, grounded and realistic.
And one name we haven't really mentioned in this entire episode is Doug Belk. Doug Belk went from the young coach who we were having to pay a lot of money to get him to stay and not take a head coaching job somewhere, to a guy who's got something to prove this year. He's gotta show that last year was an anomaly, because he went from being the coach, the defensive coordinator, to people on social media, granted, but U of H fans going, is he even going to keep his job this year? Are we going to keep him here? And he's got a lot to prove this year. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can add any wrinkles to a defensive philosophy, which honestly got shown up last year. And he went from being the belle of the ball to the guy who was struggling to keep his job, I think, at some point.
Yeah, I think it was premature for anyone to think that there was any doubt that he was going to keep his job heading into this season. But if the defense looks like it looked last year, I think you have to seriously consider it at that point whether or not you're bringing him back.
All right, on that happy note, Dustin, take us home.
What a positive way to end. On our way out, do want to mention, as always, we are extremely appreciative of our Scott and Holman Patreon patrons. And actually, we meant to mention a little bit further at the top, but we'll do a little email blast here. But a week from today, as we were recording this on Monday the 7th, so that'll be on Monday the 14th, sometime in the evening, we'll finalize that. But we are going to do a Zoom hangout with all of our Patreon supporters who can make it. So we'll send you guys a private Zoom link. You guys can hang out with us, ask some questions. If you want to ask us any, a little bit spicier questions that we might not want to answer in the public domain, we'll probably give you a little bit more honest answers, as we are. It'll be, in a little private closed session there. So looking forward.
We're always honest. We're just gonna be a little more, more honest,
a little more comprehensive with our honesty. Than we would,
comprehensive with the honesty. I like that.
Normally. So looking forward to that. So hope to see some of y'all there. That should be a lot of fun. And if that's something that everybody enjoys, we'll, I think maybe consider doing that as a monthly thing going forward, just to do another thank you to our patron supporters who have been fantastic and who we tremendously appreciate. If you want to get in on that, as well as getting access to our bonus content, as well as just feeling good about yourself for showing some appreciation to the work that we do on a regular basis to bring you all this Cougar content, we would love for you to go to patreon.com/shpodcast, where you can, for $5 a month, get access to all that bonus content, as well as buy yourself some good karma for sure.
As a patron, I've had the good karma. I still am a patron, so.
Hey, look at that. The karma has brought you all the way here where you are now a host on the podcast. That is proof that the Patreon Scott Holman podcast karma is real. We also love hearing from the listeners. You can email us, shpodcast@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at shpodcast. And definitely, if you're on Blue Sky, at podcast.bsky.social, go follow us over there. I think we're still in the teens of followers. We need to get at least
on the ground floor, folks.
Yes, absolutely. There's a chance to be on the ground floor. So get us over there. That's going to be it for us. So if you made it all the way to the end, congratulations. You're an excellent person. And as always,
go Cougs.